for some reason the light, but you can hear how it's, so, it's pretty.
I call to order Whittier City Council regular meeting Tuesday, June 19th at 7 p.m. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call. Monty Irvin.
Here.
David Pinkish.
Here.
Dave Dickinson.
Here.
Deborah Hicks. And Dan Blair.
Here. Let the record reflect administration present.
Dan, can we make a motion to excuse those who are absent?
Yes. For a motion?
Move to excuse Peter Denmark, Victor Shen, and Deborah Hicks. I'll second.
Calling for a vote. Dave Pinkish.
Yes.
Dave Dixon.
Yes.
Monty Irvin. Yes. And Dan Blair.
Yes. Okay, so let the record reflect administration present. Annie Reeves, acting city manager. Holly Wells, city attorney. John Janik, finance officer. Kyle Sinclair, harbor master. Greg Russell, public safety director. And it looks like it's it. I'd ask for a motion for the approval of minutes.
Move to approve the minutes of May 22nd and May 30th, special meeting minutes. I'll second.
Any discussion? No? Calling for a vote. Dave Pinkish.
Yes.
Dave Dickinson.
Yes.
Monty Irvin.
Yeah.
And Dan Blair.
Yes. And I'd ask for a motion approving tonight's agenda.
Move to approve tonight's meeting agenda with 2 changes. Moving 17A, the Army Corps of Engineers, to presentations, 12B, and an addition of a community plaque presentation to 12A. Or not moving it, adding it. I'll second.
Calling for a vote, Dave Pinkish.
Yes.
Dave Dixon.
Yes.
Monty Irvin.
Yes.
Dan Blair.
Yes. Okay. For my mayor's report, I was in Anchorage when Annie signed the final documents taking over possession of the DeLong dock. So the city of Whittier is now the owner of a 690-foot dock. And let's see, yesterday we had a wonderful meeting with staff regarding Title II, and that's about it. Yeah, I think it was like 100. Okay, Annie's probably got it in her report.
Okay.
Okay, moving on to manager's report.
So to augment what Dan said, we did sign over the documents, the closing documents for the DeLong dock, and we also received a check for $115,642.40, which I believe were the proceeds owed to us from 2017. And that's really all I have in addition to the report that I submitted for the packet. I'm sorry, I have one more thing. One of the directors is going to give an oral report also, Greg Russell, just for public safety.
Mr. Mayor and Council, thank you for the opportunity to come up and address you. This is my first oral report on how we're doing in the Public Safety Department. And I'd like to focus our attention on all 3 aspects of that, the police, the fire, and the ambulance. Since we've been moving into our new facility, there's understandably some things that need to be ironed out in that transition. Transferring technology from BTI to our new building has been a challenge. Some of the technology that we use up there doesn't work here now. Up there we're relying on cable interconnect, and now it's DSL and wireless. And so just migrating that technology over here has been a challenge, and we've been able to work that out. We still got a couple more speed bumps on some police-related technology, but we're fixing that. And hopefully, but the next time that I speak to you, all of that will be operational. On the same token, some of the things that the fire department and the ambulance needed to be ironed out by purchasing much needed supplies, making some repairs, then their capacity has increased as well. We've been working very well with our public safety counterparts as far as equipping the vehicles and making sure that we're able to respond and deliver the level of service that our community here in Whittier and also there in Girdwood respects. Because we have to provide a service over there in Girdwood, then the vehicles need to be very self-sufficient. They can't just run back to the station and pick up supplies. And so making them more self-sustaining and able to rely on themselves until aid gets there, we're working that out. Also integrating the technology from our substation over there as to where the officers are able to work to process some of the things that they need to do and generate the reports. That's being updated as well. So bottom line on all of that is we're making progress. We've identified had some needs, and we're taking care of that. It would be remiss in any kind of a report like this not to give you stick figures next to categories. Everybody likes to have stats on the number of traffic stops that have been made, the number of citations that have been made, the number of arrests that have been generated. And sometimes taking a look at those tick figures, at those ticks, give a false impression that the more ticks you have, the more busy you are, the more productive you've been. And that's really not the way to measure a response. Obviously, some ticks take longer to process than others. We've just received a tick that we're working on now that's going to take days in the completion. Very, very productive, but time-consuming. So I have some stats that I can give to you, but with this qualifier, it doesn't really reflect how busy all of the officers have been doing. Traffic enforcement, especially around the tunnel area, is one of the priorities that have been identified that need to be addressed. But as you might imagine, that's also generated a few complaints. And so I'd like to explain the process. When someone is approaching the tunnel and they're running a little bit late, or they think they are, they may exceed the posted speed limit. So that generates some attention and they're going to get stopped. Now, if we stop them and they're already running late, they're going to miss the tunnel. That doesn't seem like a fair process. And so what the officers have been doing is they will follow the vehicle through the tunnel to the other side and make the stop there. Someone watching that might get the idea that, what did they do in the tunnel that made them get stopped? Well, they didn't do anything in the tunnel. It was pre-tunnel activity that generated the result. Now, they may or may not get a citation, but they're certainly going to be addressed, but we're not going to penalize them twice by taking enforcement action and making them miss the tunnel too. So if you see an officer on either side of the tunnel with a vehicle stopped, it's pre-tunnel action that's resulted in the stop. But to reduce the amount of complaints, if they're not going to get a ticket, chances are they'll be stopped, cautioned, and sent on their way. Again, we're trying to enforce and be fair in that enforcement, and not to turn a blind eye, but also not to double penalize. So if you see an officer on either side of the tunnel on a traffic stop, it's pre-tunnel activity. Our agency is called upon to deliver agency assist from time to time. Outside allied agencies may call upon the Whittier Police Department to help them. I'm grateful that they consider us an ally and a resource. And as we become increasingly more capable, the number of agency assists that we're going to receive, I anticipate will climb. And our goal is to be considered a reliable and a professional resource. We are responding to calls both within the community and in Girdwood, and if we have one or two officers on, there may be a delayed response depending upon the location of the officer. This evening we had a panic alarm that was sent off in Girdwood. Both of our officers were in Whittier, so they had to make a very quick and rapid response to Whittier. We received cooperation with the tunnel, we received cooperation with the construction, and they were able to get there in a very timely fashion and respond. Our contract says that we're going to be in Girdwood 2-3 times a day. I believe 3 times a day is what our goal is. When you stop and you think about the level of service that we're providing to that community, that's pretty exemplary. Many communities in Anchorage, many neighborhoods in Anchorage with a lot more police officers available don't get that kind of coverage. And then to provide that level of coverage here as well. What I'm reminding the council and our communities of this is that we provide 24/7 response, and depending upon the location of the officer, it may be 20 minutes or it may be longer before they're able to actually get to the call, but they do get to the calls for service. We just ask the community and the council to be patient while we get there. They're absolutely doing their best. They're putting in lots of time and they're giving good service. Now, having said that, we're anticipating some personnel changes. I anticipate that 3 of our officers are going to be accepting employment elsewhere. Part of their career advancement, they want to go to another agency. And in and of itself, that doesn't seem like a large number, but when you compare it to Anchorage, that would be like 200 of their police officers leaving in 1 week. that's going to have a big impact. And I'm not saying that as a gloom, because we've been actively recruiting, and I hope that we will be able to replace them when they make that decision to leave very, very quickly. We've been screening applicants, have some that are just in the wings, 2 with experience and already certified, and 1, bless his heart, wants to get into the profession right away and take it as a career path. So we have a very young applicant that's considering it. So it's not all gloom and doom, but there are changes that are happening within the department. To enhance the delivery of our services, we are reaching out to folks that are in a position to help, specifically looking at some outside dispatch services that will help us be able to answer the calls and be able to respond to the calls without being distracted by answering the phone. As a council, we've been looking at personnel changes and policy revision. Within the department, we're doing the same thing. And we've identified high-risk areas that need to be reviewed and examined so that we reduce our likelihood of liability exposures. And that whole process is being met with very positive results and support from the department. Some of the personnel concerns that may have reached the council's levels in the past are being resolved and being addressed. The officers are being kept busy. They're responding calls and they're doing really good work. Officer Hager is going to be receiving recognition for the work that he did as interim chief. The Girdwood Board of Supervisors has asked that he attend their next regularly scheduled meeting to receive that public commendation for the work that he has done. I was unable to attend the workshop last night because I was attending a GBOS meeting in Girdwood. And after my oral complaint, they all turned to the public safety coordinator that's been there for the longest time as if to get his approval or to get his read on the whole situation, and he summed it up this way. We have received no complaints about the Whittier Police Department, and he was making reference to some pretty high-profile, sensitive matters that had gone there, and they all reported back that they were pleased with the work that the officers are doing. So that's my report to you all, to let you know that we're very busy, we're working hard. We are upgrading our data collection system so that I can provide you with a more accurate stick figure on each one of the categories. Your input is welcome. My door is always open. Please take some of my business cards before you leave, and whenever someone has a complaint or if they have an issue or they just want to talk, please give them that card, because I'd be happy to talk to them. Thank you, Greg. Oh, go ahead.
Do
Sorry.
you have any problems with 911 at all? Can you make the transition to...
We're working that out. Once we've got a provider that's interested and we've got that already nibbling on the hook, and once we get the go-ahead from that, then we'll get our IT folks to work on that, so we will have no problem. I anticipate none. Thank you. Thank you, Greg. Okay, thank you. Do we have any questions for any of the other directors? Oh, Holly's got something.
Yes, I know I usually don't have much to report, but I have a few things I wanted to bring you guys up to speed on today. One is that we recently received an order in the Grisham versus Officer Castleman and the municipality of Anchorage dismissing Officer Castleman and therefore Whittier's interest in this in that proceeding. So that is very good news for Whittier and for Officer Castleman. We are concluding that case. One thing to note is that because that case was covered by insurance, I anticipate you will see about a $40,000 reimbursement at this stage, and there may be one additional invoice going out that you'll be directly or that I think we're going to send that directly, so you hopefully won't have to deal with reimbursement on that one, but that is through APEI, your insurance carrier. So that is one update. Another issue is, and I'm actually looking for direction on this front. I met with the Alaska Railroad Corporation and Whittier Manor this last week, and Whittier Manor is in the difficult position of having a 12-year or a potential 12-year lease, which council approved, because that is the extent of the city of Whittier's interest in the land. We cannot, as a matter of law, grant them an additional interest that we don't have in the options to extend. So while the master lease might cover decades longer, that doesn't happen until that option to extend is triggered, meaning you have condo owners with a 12-year leasehold, and that is a significantly different value than, say, outright fee simple ownership. So as they try to navigate and figure out how to solve that problem with the railroad, I believe they intend to go before the railroad real estate committee and or the board and demonstrate sort of the conundrum that they're in. What they are seeking from the city council is a resolution that would say, presuming the city or conditional upon the city receiving full value for its leasehold interest, the city supports their ability to obtain ownership of the land from the railroad. So it's a fairly significant issue, but what I'm hoping to do, I told them that I would bring this to you, and I'm hoping one of you would be willing to sponsor that resolution. To that end, neither Peter nor the mayor have that ability because of the conflict under our new provisions. It's pretty clear. So if Dan is silent on it, that would be, that would be why. It's just we need to make sure that we do things appropriately. So the direction I'm looking for, and this is a mouthful, but I'm hoping one of the other council members present would be willing to sponsor a resolution that I can then draft and just put on your next agenda. And then that will give you an avenue to discuss it and make a decision. So, yes?
Yeah, I would do that, yeah.
Okay, so that will be something you should anticipate seeing on your agenda. And the last thing, very briefly, our firm had a bunch of individuals that came out to work on the Trails project with Parks and Rec, and they were raving about it, and none of them could lift their arms, but they were raving about it. And we are looking forward to a follow-up in July, and it's really been a very popular, great project for us. So just wanted to say thank you for that. And that's all, unless you have questions for me. Okay.
Thank you, Holly. So, commission reports. Looks like we have something in Ports and Harbor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, we had a special meeting here, what day was it? On June 12th, kind of got some updates on where the harbor rebuild is, some options for that. There's some decisions that can be made by you guys for different options that the Bellingham Marine wants to do. It's pretty early in the stages now. We made a couple recommendations that you'll see in the next agenda, but one of the main things was moving the C and D connector float, or the turning basin area, back to where it originally was, and removing the slips on the south side of it. Am I right, Dave? So that way it would create two more larger vessel permanent slips, which in the end of in long term would create more revenue. There were some other options too to power whiskey float and things like that was voted down, but we did vote to move that connector float. So, or to recommend to you that would be the way you should go. We'd also are planning sometime in early August to have another special meeting to go over the budget for the harbor. Our next normal meeting is until September, and we think that's probably too late to really give recommendations to Kyle and to you guys. So everybody was on board for it. August can still be pretty busy, but I think we'll be able to make it work with the telephone conference and stuff like that. So we're getting there. We appreciate everybody showing up. Councilmember Denmark's there. Mayor Blair was there for a while. There was some staff that was here as well, some extra staff. So it's cool to see that we're putting our effort in, and you guys are as well, to try to make this better. So I know next one we'll have the DeLong dock, an update from Kyle on that one, so it's exciting times. Anything for me?
Do you need anything for preparation for the budget? I mean, because the budget won't be ready, so you can just take from last year's, or how would you proceed?
I think that's the plan, is we're going to kind of take from last year's and hold a work session, kind of talk through things like that, see where we can maybe adjust it, and then have Kyle Brady bring that back up, as this is what our thoughts were, or we can bring it to you guys. It's going to be kind of an informal thing, but I think there's some stuff that as users of the harbor we could probably adjust, things that need to be looked at to maybe we can maybe bring up to you.
Perfect. Thank you, Greg. Dave, do you have anything from Parks and Rec?
Yeah, just a quick rundown of some of the things that we've done here. On the 2nd, we did local volunteers showed up for a work party down on the Whittier Creek Trail, and we straightened up down there, hauled in a little bit of gravel and did some brushing and just cleaned up some of the rough areas there. Then on the 9th, we had a group come in, mostly from Alaska, from the Voyage School. Some of the same kids that are part of Alaska Geographic, I think. And they helped us work on the connector trail that goes from where the new park is, and we're going to try and connect from there up to Horsetail Falls Trail. So there was a bunch of young kids, and we really put them to work hauling rocks and did some heavy lifting. Yeah, we really made them work, and they did a great job. And then this last weekend, as Holly mentioned, we did another work party up on the Horsetail Falls Trail proper. Had Holly's group came down, and we had a group, Alaska Trails is a group that we worked with before last year that came down and helped us. And likewise, I almost couldn't get out of bed the next day. I was so tired from just climbing up. I forgot how steep that trail is, but we got a lot accomplished and still have a lot more work to do. So I'm sure that we will have another work party up there to work on that step and run. And then this weekend, and just so we had, I think we had at least 10 volunteers the first time. We had 19 volunteers on the 9th. We had at least 18 or 19 this last weekend, and we have 18 people signed up for this coming weekend. And we're going to work on the Emerald Cove Trail, and that'll be from what I'm told, most of the volunteers are guys, people my age, so I expect that to be a little bit easier. Probably a little more brushing and maybe a little drainage project here and there, but for the most part not quite as strenuous as this last weekend. But that last weekend was tough. But yeah, we're making some good progress. Also, I'm going to meet with the people from KMTA about the grant that we were awarded, but haven't filled out the paperwork for yet. So I'll meet with them actually next week and try and get that finalized for us. So we'll put a little more money back into our Parks and Rec budget. That's it for me.
That's very busy Parks and Rec. Okay, citizens' comments on agenda items not scheduled for public hearing. And then moving on to presentations. I've been asked by members of the community to make a presentation.
Dave Schofield. The citizens of Whittier would like to extend their sincere thanks and deepest appreciation to you for your service as Chief of Police and your countless hours of selfless service to the city and community. Our belief is that Whittier is a better place today because of your presence.
And I would note that that petition is not all those who would, it's all that there was time to collect in a short period of time.
Okay, we have another presentation. We have the Army Corps of Engineers.
Hello, Mayor Blair and the council. Thanks for having us. My name is George Calley, and I'm an engineer and planner at the Army Corps of Engineers in Anchorage. And I'd like to introduce my coworker, Rand Phillips. He's our new project manager on the Whittier study, and he's just began last week. So welcome, Brand. And I wanted to congratulate you on this new facility. It's my first time in here. It's really spectacular. So good job on that. I'm happy to be here. So today I was just planning to give a brief synopsis of update on the progress we've made with the long-standing study here for the navigation improvements in Whittier and where we're headed. So back on April 27th, we attained one of our milestones that were prescribed to meet in our study process, called the tentatively selected plan milestone. Achieving the milestone means that we got approval from our vertical chain, which includes a divisional office in Hawaii and then back in headquarters in Washington, D.C. Their approval that we've identified a feasible project that seems to meet the needs and meets our policies to move forward. And that plan that got approved is a 6-lane boat launch at the head of the bay site at the end of the fjord here, Passage Canal, protected by a rubble mound breakwater with an entrance channel to the north. So if anyone didn't get the handouts I brought, I think there's some copies in the back, but on the first page there's an illustration of the tentatively selected plan. And initial estimates for cost is about 24 million, but in the notes I provided in the handout, it specifies that includes quite a bit of contingency at this stage. Some of the areas we're not sure yet is, the history there. We have the fuel site that was there, so we know there's contamination of some of the soil. So how we place the material, where we're permitted to place the material that we dredge, will impact the cost. So we've done some analysis of different levels of contamination. And then we also need to do some more drilling on the site to confirm some of our geotechnical assumptions. So the contingency accounts for some of these uncertainties. And as we move forward in the study and move forward in the next phase, which is called pre-construction engineering design, that's when we come up with plans and specs. We'll collect some of that additional data. And we put that data collection off until the second phase because the cost sharing of that phase is the federal government pays much more than the local sponsor. Right now, the studies cost share 50%, 50%. And in that next phase, I believe is 80 federal, 20 local. So we try to save some of the more expensive data collection items that we can save till later in the study when it costs our local sponsors less. But we have have to account for some of that uncertainty with a contingency. So hopefully that was clear. So the 24 million could come down quite a bit if we get favorable like soil contamination data and favorable geotechnical data. Right now, the main effort is after the tentatively selected plan milestone, which is in April, within 60 days, we release a draft report of our findings to date out for review. So I was hoping to have a copy to bring to this meeting, but next week we're going to put out this report for review. It's going to come to the city for review. It goes out to the public. It'll meet the National Environmental Policy Act reviews, the environmental assessment, and also to the resource agencies, so the agencies that are concerned with salmon habitat and the marine resources here. And the one thing I skipped over that's I know on the first page is the benefit to cost ratio that we've calculated, which is an all-important thing to get funding for construction. The higher your benefit to cost ratio is, the better chance you have to get funding. And we need at least unity, which is 1, to even get approval to move forward with the project. And our benefit ratio has come up to, for this project, has come up to 3.5, which is a good benefit to cost ratio. So some of the things that challenges we overcame and advances we made since we, in the past year or so, we got the request from the city to focus on smaller scale projects that originally we were looking at larger alternatives that provided moorage in addition to boat launch facility. And due to the financial cost of the city responsibilities to develop the larger scale projects providing moorage, we were asked to refocus solely on protected boat launches. So we did that, but that required, although in the long term when we go to construction it will cost less money to construct such a facility, in the short term for the study that did add some additional costs because we were calculating benefits for providing moorage and we had costs based on the cost of the larger scale, so we kind of had to redo some of our numbers. And not having the moorage provided really took away a lot of the typical benefits that we classically claim for a project. And we all know like a big problem here is a lot of the congestion and the conflicts of the different users and the lack of upland facilities. And so we did a much better job of trying to quantify those benefits. Those aren't like benefits you just like can look up or they were kind of tougher to quantify and get approval of all the way to headquarters. And that's a big reason of why our benefit to cost ratio, I mean, there was a time where we were telling you it was like close to 1. And so now it's up to 3.5. And so that was a lot of the effort that we put a lot of effort into trying to quantify how you quantify congestion into a dollar figure and then getting buy-off from that from folks all the way back in DC. And then we've been coordinating with the Alaska Department of Environmental Conservation. I know some of you were at a meeting we had in Anchorage regarding the placement of the dredge material. So by far the cheapest option would be you dredge it, you put it on a barge, and you just take it like less than a mile offshore, or maybe it's a mile and a half to a site that I think's been designated prior. But DEC said without additional testing of soil, they will not permit that. So that's one of the uncertainties I talked about in contingency, where at this point, we're not assuming in-water placement in our cost estimates, but that's still an option when we collect the additional data. If it comes back clean, or if it comes back clean, at least in the area we're digging, it might be a possibility, so that would bring the cost down a bit. But right now, we're assuming upland placement adjacent to the project site at the head of the bay there, and some of the area that used to be the fueling facility. And we're also assuming, to be conservative, that some of that material will still be too contaminated and will require a treatment and it'll have to be like shipped to Anchorage. And that's by far the most expensive option, shipping it because it's so contaminated to be treated somewhere thermally. So, but what we did was we did a sensitivity analysis since we're not sure how much of it's contaminated, and we assumed different scenarios, between 5 and 50% has to be shipped to Anchorage. And we showed that even if half the dirt is that dirty, that we still have a positive benefit to cost ratio. It's still not 3.5, but it's still above 1. So that went a long way to alleviating any concerns with folks back in headquarters and the vertical chain, what we call our chain of command, the last thing we want to do is permit a project, then we go dig dirt and find out that it's not feasible anymore if you recalculate the benefit to cost ratio. So that was some effort we've put in that helped the strength of this project. And the other item we know the city in the future is hoping to expand this boat launch when the finances permit to a facility that provides moorage also. So we're required to look at multiple options, and we can't just look at like what our sponsor wants, even though they're paying for half of the study. Our rules and laws say we have to look at other options. So when we start looking at just a protected boat launch facility, we looked at different alignments, some with an entrance channel where you enter from the north and some where you enter from the south. And the south breakwater alignment's actually a bit shorter because of the way the waves come in. You don't need as long of it's because of the angle of the waves, but I'm not the engineer that designed that, so I won't get too into that. But what it comes down to is the south breakwater alignment was actually a little bit cheaper than the north, but it was really close, within, like, I would say, an error of margin with at this stage of a cost estimate. But we knew that would kind of be, if we started recommending, well, the north is the preferred alternative because it meets the city's goals of being more expandable. And then we get comments like, oh, but it's cheaper. The south is cheaper, so how can you recommend the north? But looking at the contamination from the south, from that site that's known, from the report that DLA did, and I think it's from ERM. They have monitoring wells, and they have both the groundwater and the soil. I forget not the slush zone, but there's two plumes that they have mapped out, and they both kind of trend towards the south. So what we assumed was it's more likely you're going to get more contaminated soil if you dig farther to the south. So then we adjusted our cost estimates to assume a higher percentage of the soil needs to be remediated if you go to the south entrance channel than the north, and that made the north entrance channel cheaper at this, and it helped us identify that as the preferred alternative over the south, and that meets the goal of the expandable harbor, because if we did it to the south, you'd have to deconstruct that whole breakwater and reconstruct it in order to expand it. In the north, you can just it'd be a much smaller effort to expand it. So that's, I guess, the good news. And then the next item is a funding update. And before Kim, who was the last project manager before Brand came on, left to work at headquarters, she sent a letter May 16th requesting an additional $102,000 and some change from the city to balance out our cost sharing, because I guess it's a little bit uneven right now, and that's to complete the study. And so some of those efforts we did is the reason for the additional costs, and that's the amount to get us forward. The remaining schedule, we have one more major milestone next, which is the agency decision milestone, which is scheduled in August, late August of this summer. That's after I mentioned the report going out for review. We get comments back from the city, the public, the resource agencies, and our headquarters and division offices. We incorporate all those comments, and then we have our next milestone, which is agency decision milestone. And that means the agency has decided to move forward with this and send the report to headquarters and then on to Congress. One of the unique things about this study is you guys got kind of I guess, an enhanced authorization with the study. Typically, our studies, there's two things. We get authorization to study something, but then we need appropriations. It's two separate processes. And then typically, we recommend a project like a boat harbor, then it goes to Congress, and they decide whether or not to fund it. And then we need, again, authorization to construct it, and then appropriations to construct it. Your authorization is, your construction is pre-authorized, so we can move directly into the design phase where we develop plans and specs, and then onto the construction phase. So that eliminates an act of like Congress, which is a very good thing, but you still need appropriations. So that's where the city can use their political savvy to make the right people know that, you know, this is an important project and get funding. But so with that said, you're eliminating a big uncertainty. Usually we have no idea how long it'll take for a project that we recommend to get authorized for construction. But since you pre-authorized, on our current schedule, this could be up for, construction could begin in 2020 if everything falls into place. But with the additional funding requesting, if there's a delay, our systems automatically, once the cost sharing imbalance gets too out of whack, it just suspends our funds and we can't work on it. So, and I don't know when that'll happen, but I know the letter said it's supposed to be within 60 days of the date of the letter. So if that were to happen, we would be stuck not doing any more work on the project until the balance was taken care of with some city funding from the city, and then we'd resume efforts. But that would endanger, with the way timing is to get in like the 2020 budget, there's a certain dates in the future where things have to be met with certain milestones, and it could bump back construction to a year to 2021. So. Any questions?
Yeah, I had a question. On your benefit to cost ratio, you have a 3.5, and I'm just trying to get, is that on a scale from 1 to 5, a scale from 1 to 10?
No, that's just a comparison of like dollar to dollar, like money expended to the benefits that the project will accrue, and it's over a 50-year time period of analysis. So it's the initial cost to construct the harbor plus what we assume will be operation and maintenance over this 50 years compared to like the benefits they'll bring in. So benefits 50 years out in the future are kind of discounted to current. It's a whole economics thing. And so a big part of it is we just built the breakwater and the entrance channel and the maneuvering channel, and the launch ramp is actually a local, and we've discussed that before, but that's a local cost and so I think we already coordinated, you plan to build the launch ramp within like a year after, because we can't claim benefits until it starts working. So say if you were not to build, if you told us you weren't going to build a launch ramp for 20 years, that would affect the benefit to cost ratio, because you wouldn't have any benefits for 20 years, and then those benefits are discounted. So what it is a comparison of dollars and costs, but it's a little more complicated because we're looking at things over 50 years and trying to make it all compare it to equal dollars.
So for every dollar spent, inclusive of the local community and the federal government, if this was...
It's saying for every dollar spent on the project, it'll accrue $3.5 in gained efficiency in navigation delays and delays in the uplands and all the uses here. So commercial fishing, sightseeing, recreational fishing, subsistence. So that's and just to put it into perspective, like I mentioned, 1 is the minimum amount we need to recommend a project, but different administrations put out like guidelines on what's preferable, like, well, legally 1, but we're not going to really look at anything unless it's, and right now it's 2.5, so you're well, and it's only one digit, but that's a big difference between 2.5 and 3.5, so I've never, this is the highest benefit cost ratio that I've worked on, to be honest, so, and I've been,
that's a good news.
So that's great news, and that was a lot of work, because like I mentioned, the kind of benefits you're gaining here aren't things you just like kind of look on a database and multiply it by like so many years. So
I'm sure you have it.
So if our economist Eric were here, I would compliment him on it, but he didn't come. So, but that's who did all that work. Our economists. So they have the tough job of quantifying that. So
I met him. He had some good information. And the date of May 16th, so the 60 days falls one day before our next council meeting.
Okay.
Is that going to be do you recommend a special council meeting, or missing it by a day is
Dan, if I may interject, Naylene is going to be requesting a special meeting for June 28th, so we may be able to introduce this then. But I'll let Naylene, when the time comes, explain the need for that special meeting. So just so you know what's coming.
Thank you.
So okay. That's soon, yeah. I'm thinking what date it is now. That's like 10. Okay, yeah. So, any other questions? Monty.
Need any rubble?
What's that?
The rubble mail break wire.
Oh.
Rubble, we've got a pile of it right there.
What kind of rubble?
Big cement building there.
Oh, the Buckner building. Yeah, okay. I didn't know the Buckner building, yeah. So, I think they want very specific about the rocks they want to use, yeah. So, to withstand the icing. I know you don't get big ice here, but still the freeze thaw and the waves, and so the breakwaters actually consist of, this is outside my area of expertise too, but there's armor stone, and then there's what they call B-rock, which is like smaller than the armor stone. The armor stone's outside, then B-rock, which is somewhere in between, and then there's like a core layer, which is like permeable, because you don't want water getting stuck in there and freezing and thawing. So the core is actually quite small, like it's probably like large gravel sized. But the armor stone is usually what's the most expensive. But the wave climate up there is not compared. I'm also doing a harbor study in St. George, and you need some big rock out there. And this rock is pretty small by comparison. So.
This additional 102,000 is just because the study's taken longer, the additional 102,000 that we're asking for.
Well, so I haven't been tracking the funding throughout the study because I'm kind of filling in for that, so I don't, when I look at the numbers that, the 102,000, and then there's a cost sharing balance, and then that was off by, I don't know if Brand knows the numbers, but the math doesn't add up that not all that 102,000 is some of it's imbalance that was pre-existing, so, and then there is an additional amount because of some of the items I discussed. But what the breakout is, I don't know, but I think it's maybe like around $40,000 extra, but I think some of it's pre-existing just because and you know, the city gets credit for work in kind, like not all the match has to be in cash. So I know the city did a geotechnical investigation out there with one of the firms in Anchorage, and you get, you know, a credit for what you spent on that. So it's always, sometimes you think things are balanced, but when the work in kind credits come through and stuff, there may be a shortfall. I don't know for 100%, but so it's a little bit of both of those, like balancing out the cost sharing and some additional costs, mostly due to the extra efforts to try to get the benefit to cost ratio up and to adjust to the boat launch facilities. So.
Is there any interaction with the WRDA funding that was just passed by the House? You know, that was Water Resource Development Agency. I don't know if that is connected with you guys.
Well, that is, I mean, that's like where you, like the authorization I was speaking of, where you're pre-approved for construction, that was probably part of a WRDA bill. And so that's where the Corps of Engineers gets, not all, but a majority of their project authorizations is through the Water Resources Development Act. And that's politics back at the DC level. So when it comes out, eventually it trickles down to someone like me, what got approved. But there was, yeah, so that's, I think that's the source of, that'll be on the first page of the report that goes out next week when the, I think your study was approved in one act, and then I'm not 100%, but I think that then subsequent to that, you got the additional approval for the expedited completion of projects, which means the construction's pre-approved. So somebody was representing Whittier well back in Washington, D.C. to get that. So yeah.
Very much.
Okay.
That information.
Okay, no problem. So and whoever does that, keep it up for when construction's getting close, because you need those funds for construction. So,
Mr. Goldstein.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you very much for your presentation. I was on the council back in 2003, 4, 5, 6, and I think 2007. And the process that we had at that particular time involved assembling a group of potential customers for projects of this type and assessing which direction we needed to go. The Port and Harbor Commission was involved in that. They gave their input and actually sponsored some of these meetings. And for some reason, this process has been abrogated here. This seems to have taken on a life of its own. And I would strongly suggest to the council that you put a timeout on this project and reassess what direction the city needs to go with this. Back in 2000, Whittier was approved for a navigational studies program by the feds. In 2007, the WRDA Act kicked in. We had a city manager at the time who had a lot of foresight, a lot of planning for development at the head of the bay. And the WRDA Act, basically, he got us included in that. We were, I think, the only Alaskan community to get included in that particular WRDA bill. And as a result of that, I believe there was a fund that was established. Money wasn't put into the fund. That has to be appropriated by Congress. But I recollect that this was somewhere around $35 million. Since that time, the Corps has come up with 3 different proposals for plans. One was the basic, actually this plan that I'm looking at now is even smaller than the first plan that the Corps had, plan number 1. There were 3 plans. One was a very small, basic boat launch facility. The second was a harbor, I think 150 slip harbor with a launch facility. And the third was kind of the grandiose plan where excavated back into the land, it dredged further, and the breakwater went further off to the north, and it was a much more expansive harbor. When you look at the economics, and I've come up with numbers here, as far as generating income from things like just the boat launch facility, 150 slip harbor. They didn't look at the Cadillac version to generate revenue there. But when you're looking at a launch facility, what you're doing is facilitating people who come down to Whittier, they launch their boat, they fuel up at Essential One or Costco where the cost of fuel is a lot cheaper, and they basically park their trailers in that area and then leave. There's no incentive there for business to develop further. It's basically truncating the potential source of revenue and the potential impetus for development over at the head of the bay. We had the WRDA bill basically fall into our lap. This was the goose that laid the golden egg. This is a $35 million golden egg, and we need to maximize use of that. When when we're looking at a program like this, I can't even imagine how somebody could come up with just a boat launch facility. I think the cost estimate for the option 2 was about $40 million. Now, granted, these numbers fluctuate. But if the city, and I understand it's either a 90 or an 80% matching fund, depending upon how you look at it, it's 90%, but then there's a payoff of 10% over some undefined period of time. Well, if you look at a $40 million project and you say, well, the city is going to have to come up with a launch lanes, it's going to have to come up with some upland infrastructure, but say the big cost is the breakwater, I would imagine, and also the turning basin, dredging out for the turning basin. According to what you just said, if you go to the north, the chances of contaminated soil is less. Okay. The initial plan here doesn't even, this breakwater doesn't even go as far north as the plan that I'm looking at here, which was valid just about a year and a half or 2 years ago. This never went before the Ports and Harbor Commission. I've talked to the, just one more minute, Dan. I've talked to the harbor master, I've talked to people on the Ports and Harbor Commission about this, and there's no question that this option 2 is the very least that we should do. So I would ask the council to reassess this, put a halt on this, do some public workshops where you really have input here, and then assess a good direction. Thank you.
With the relief of the draft reports, that's next week, I can just, that's a good time to get public input like that in a bigger venue. So I've been suggested that to some folks in my office, so it sounds like, if that's something you want, we can definitely accommodate that. And you brought up a good point, and you noticed that something I didn't mention is in an effort to improve the benefit cost ratio. When it was down near 1, we did some, and I think it was on the notes, but I didn't say anything. We did do some cost saving measures on the design of the breakwater, and you are correct that the alignment is shorter. And the difference there is if there's just a launching facility, the criteria for waves behind the breakwater is not as stringent as if you have boats moored. And so something to consider is, if you expand from moorage, then you will it will revert back to that more stringent criteria, and that'll be some of the additional costs would be to beef up the breakwater. So there could be pros and cons of trying to improve the benefit cost ratio now, but then having more to spend in the future if you expand the harbor. So.
And this initially is a seasonal part for about 4.5 months.
For the transient users, yeah, the trailerable boats. The people that trailer the boats are really the main users. So yes.
One of the things that has been, I know this, you guys have really strict guidelines that you have to follow, and I get the feeling that sometimes you guys are painted into the corner by those, but this is, I think, our third recent petition for additional funds. If we were to come up with these funds, can we anticipate being asked for more funds later down the road, or?
We don't anticipate asking for more funds.
So it's.
But I understand. This project has been along and with starts and stops, and as he mentioned, there's a history, and
if we just ran out the numbers, if it ran out and it cost $24 million for us participating in 20% of that, we're looking at a $70 million cost benefit over 50 years. Or more, more than that, but you multiply 3.5 times 24 million. Is that what I would do?
3.5? Oh, no. Oh, for the benefits?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Over 50 years, so. Yes. So the report will have more information about the cost sharing for the community, because since nothing's easy, and so it's not just a straight up 80-20, because some things are considered a federal part of the project and some's a local cost, like the launch ramp. So it won't be exactly 80-20, but close to that. So, but we'll get you that information by the end of next week.
Thanks very much for coming all the way down to Whittier.
Oh, no, my pleasure. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. Madam Clerk, would you read the first introduction?
Yes, sir. Ordinance 14-2018, an ordinance of the City of Whittier, Alaska, amending Whittier Municipal Code in regard to city elections by adopting a new elections code to allow for candidates to file a declaration of candidacy to place their name on the ballot by adopting a new Title IV elections, Chapter 4.04, General Provisions, Chapter 4.08, Voter Qualifications, and Chapter 4.12, Candidates, amending Sections 2.06.010, Incorporation of State and Federal Law, 2.04.030, Qualifications, and 2.04.040, Terms, and repealing Sections 2.06.010 to 2.06.060 and 2.04050. Organization meeting, all related to candidates filing for office and related election requirements to allow the city a more efficient and effective way to operate city elections. So what you're looking at, Christy Smithers actually, she was revising this code, and she has been working on it since last year. But she really wanted to get this code just straightened out because it is election season, and once we approve the ordinance and adopt it, we will start the process.
Start the process?
The election process.
I move to introduce ordinance 04-2018 and schedule for public hearing on the next regular scheduled meeting, which is July.
She was actually hoping to get this done by June, so she asked if I could recommend a special meeting next week, June 28th.
Okay, we'll June 28th.
I'll second.
Is there any chance that we can have it on the 26th? Or the...
Yes, we could have it on the 26th.
I'll amend my motion to 26th.
Oh, the 26th?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll accept the amendment.
So,
We have discussion.
can we talk about this a little bit? I know it's just a first reading, but there's some minor changes.
Well, the reason I asked for the 28th was Chrissy will be down to answer any question you guys have because these are her revisions, so. my bad, 26th.
Do you think she's going to be able to make the 26th?
Yeah, she told me the 26th and the 27th and 28th were her ideal days, but she wanted it later in the week because it was closer to Friday. So I'll let her know that the 26th will have to do.
It's much appreciated. I'd like to attend. She's wanting it to be the second reading, right?
Yes.
So what the reason why I'd make a comment now is in hopes that could be maybe edited or something like that by then. But anyway, let me just make it. If it can't happen, it can't happen. One of the things that she took out that I thought had value for us as a small community, because we have so few voters, is we have this, I think she mentioned that some of our stuff is a little dated, but we have a process where if you want to get on the ballot, you essentially get 10 of your favorite citizens to sign a petition. And that kind of set a certain it set a threshold. It's not a really high threshold, but basically you actually had to go and meet the people in your community. And I thought that was good. It was something I found very uncomfortable the first time I did it. Call me shy.
She didn't have a plan to remove that. I remember last election she said that a lot of people aren't doing it, but she said Whittier could still do it. So
okay.
I have some comments on it too that I'm kind of surprised that there wasn't conversation with council about what we wanted to change or brought it to us before it got to this point. But just as a few things. So if we're trying to rush this, under 412-030, it says the city clerk shall post it on the website, and then it says the notice may also be posted in conspicuous places in the city. Not everyone does internet. I would say it shouldn't be may, it should be will. There should be an alternative to internet. That you shouldn't expect everybody to be looking at the city's website. So there needs to be, to me, a specific place you post it on a board. Secondly, under 412.040, it says that candidacy must be filed 57 days before this regular election, 46 days, blah, blah, blah. You expect people to know what that is. It used to be like August 5th, August 1st, August 15th. To be a lot simpler if we had dates versus numbers, so that people are trying to calculate out when it really is. And then the third one, under H, it talks about giving 3 calendar days for the clerk can give notice, and the person has to answer within 3 calendar days. So if you give notice on Friday and it's a holiday on Monday, how does that person give notice? It should at least say 3 working days, not calendar days. It's in there twice under H, but that could make it impossible for a person to respond.
and what was this under?
Oh, it's down. Where is it?
12.030, declarations of candidacy.
It's under 412.050 is the 3 calendar days. Yeah, there's 3 different.
3 different ones starting at 030,
yeah.
040, and 050.
Correct.
I remember one year some council members got confused on those dates and times.
KISS.
Nayleen, if I could make a comment, the city calendar hasn't been kept up, the online calendar version, or I may be on a wrong page, but I'm wondering if that's something.
I don't have access to the calendar. Okay. Jennifer tried to give me access, but we tried, and it was a process where it had a lot to deal with coding, and we didn't really understand it, and the person at base camp tried to explain it, and then ultimately they just said it was, is this the one on the website? Yeah, we tried to link it, and to no avail.
I was just thinking that might help if we
Okay, are we ready? Call for a vote?
Calling for a vote to introduce and schedule a second hearing for ordinance 14-2018. Dave Pinkish?
Yes.
Dave Dixon?
Yes.
Monty Irvin?
Yes.
And Dan Blair?
Yes. Madam Clerk, would you read the next resolution?
Making sure it's the right number. Okay. Resolution 14-2018, a resolution of the City of Whittier, Alaska, amending the classification chart for the city to remove all director positions that are currently unfilled by either full-time or interim employees from that chart and require the new contracted city manager to propose revisions to classifications, organization, and funded positions with the City of Whittier.
Ask for a motion.
Dan, after our meeting, or after our work session last night.
Let's just bring it up and
I'll make a motion.
To adopt?
Second.
Okay, so now it's on the table.
So after our work session last night, I think we cleared some of this up, and I feel like we don't need to adopt this.
Right. In addition, well, I'm pretty sure, but the part that we are essentially starting over with, there is a component of our ordinance that requires us to have certain offices filled. Is that's getting redone as well? Because there's a conflict here, is what Holly introduced the resolution, but what we found out was that there was a conflict in that we have on our books a requirement for certain positions. We've never filled them.
As of today, we do have an acting person in that position, so we are legally compliant with the code. Nothing has been formally adopted. My understanding after the work session yesterday is that there's 4 tasks that I need to do. We're going to look at Title 29. I'm going to look at municode.org. Basically, all of that is going to be done away with. Have we done away with it yet? Clearly not, but it's in a process. We're legally compliant right now. we're okay, meaning, like, my understanding is that we can either adopt this ordinance because it doesn't really change anything, or we can table it, but I'll let Holly speak to it.
Yes, that's right. You have one position in your code, which is unusual, that you mandate to be filled, and that is, I have not seen anything like it in another jurisdiction, and that is your Director of Administration position. That said, that position can be defined to fill very different roles depending on it as it reads. When you look at the code provision, it appears that that is both you have an executive assistant position that is required. That is also a very different role than how most people would define executive assistant, because it not only assumes some administrative functions such as tax review, it also has personnel record and filing and personnel administration roles included in that position, which again is not generally codified. So I think, to the extent that you're suggesting, regardless of what happens with this resolution, that when you do your personnel rewrite and your code rewrite, that you revisit that, I would strongly second that. I think that you want to really look at what you're codifying and why, and what that does to flexibility, both pros and cons, and where you really want to be. So I would second the mayor's comments in that regard. With this resolution, the one thing, if you do pass this, which again, Annie's correct, I have no legal concern here, you are compliant, but remember that here, by resolution, you're creating an obligation that any new permanent contracted city manager take up this classification issue within the first few months of his or her employment. And so because of that, make sure you have a calendaring tickler or something, because that's very easy to, when you get busy and you're running 1,000,000 miles per minute, and and during the transition, to accidentally fall out of compliance with the resolution. So that would be my 2 cents on both issues.
So just ask to table it?
And what you would generally do here, since you have a motion and a second, is just call the question, and then it'll likely fail. Because of where we are in the stage, that's probably the cleanest way. Or it might pass. I'm not, suggesting.
I would support calling for the vote based on if we bring it back, we may or may not need the part about the city manager taking out, because by the time we get there, we might have one, who knows. So to me, it'd be cleaner to rewrite it and start from scratch, but that's my opinion.
We don't need it. Let's don't do it. We don't have to have it, So.
Call for the question.
The vote? Okay. Calling the question, Dave Pinkish.
Yes. Oh, sorry, no.
Okay.
What was that?
It's a no.
It's a no.
It's a no.
Dave Dickinson.
No.
Oh, Monty Irvin.
No.
And Dan Blair.
No. Okay, moving on to new business. Earthquake of 1964 commemorative monument.
Ted Spencer came last meeting, and he kind of gave an introduction for this. He said he's been trying to have this on the agenda for quite some time. And so when we had our last meeting, when he presented, Peter moved that this be on new business for the next regular scheduled meeting. So here it is.
Okay.
And you spelled your name wrong.
Yeah.
Mayor, if I could, one thing I would just say is, what is the request, just to make sure if there's appropriations here or something that require either a resolution or an ordinance, which I'm guessing it's just a resolution that you would need, but I think you want to, any expenditure that is above and beyond any amount, or is it just simply recognizing and depending on the dollar amount, the authority of the city administration, this may not need to come before council, maybe it wants to come to council as just simply as a recognition and understanding. So I would recommend that prior to placement on the next agenda, you just have a more clear understanding of what they're looking for. Yes.
Yeah. My understanding is he's working with Scott. Scott's not here, so.
We're gonna move a bit wrong.
Bonds for Bellingham Marine Industries Harbor Reconstruction Phase 3.
So on this, I'm going to call on Kyle Sinclair, our harbor master, who has been brought up to speed, I think, on what he needs to present for your consideration.
Good afternoon. I finally was, after some thorough digging, was able to go back to the folks that have issued the original bond of $6.4 million to us to find out if there was actually additional funds, if those funds that we originally requested, that we spent the $2.1 million with, were still available to us, and to continue with the project. And anyway, so Devin, who is the original person that worked with us on this, was able to come back to me and gave me a thorough breakdown of what we could do. And there's $4.4 million left in that fund, or that is approved to us already. So we just, if we decide to go ahead and continue with the project, there's funding available for us to start, continue on with it. Looking at it, I sent all of you folks a copy that was both a 20 and a 25-year project, maturity on the loan. My suggestion, and it's only my suggestion, but is we continue at the 25 because it's a lot less money outlay per year in case something should happen. The one reason I did that is because the way the bond is read is that we can't pay it back for the first 10 years. And I think one of the things that Mark didn't really, he always said to us that, well, we can't pay it back. Well, we could not pay it back in the first 10 years, even with the one we have out right now, is because originally the way it's set up is the first 10 years are part of the interest and stuff, and even if we paid it back, we'd still be paying 10 years worth of interest. So it's really not in our benefit to throw our money back to them because we're not going to win anything by it. So what I thought was if we continued with the bond and asked for it, we extend it out for 25 years. That gives us that $40,000 a year additional money that we'd pay back in the first amount of 20. We could throw into an account and save it up, and in 10 years we could pay that funds back if we needed to. So that's what I'm trying to get across. And the great thing about it is, like I said, if we want to continue with it, the funds are available to us. We just have to go and reapply for requesting the additional $4.4 million. One of the thoughts is that we also are working on getting a grant, a $25 million grant, and actually using this as a stopgap in case that that grant doesn't come through. This way we could continue with it and complete this if the grant fell through. But, my thought is that we go ahead and request this, get Bellingham started on the pilings and stuff this winter like we were talking about. At the same time, we throw in for the grant, get the $25 million. If we don't need this money, then we can block that or stop the loan on it, and we're not out anything. But if it doesn't come through, we still continue with it. So I hope that kind of gives you an idea of what I'm trying to look at.
Kyle, just super fast to clarify what you and I had spoken about this morning, that the bonds, we can borrow $4.4 million. The project, however, is going to cost $5.5 million, so we're $1.1 million short. So that shortage, according to my understanding, just to clarify for you guys, is that we would actually start with Bellingham. If we get the grant, we're not going to know about that until October, end of October.
Well, we would know, but the funds would not be available to us until the 1st of October from the federal government, their fiscal year.
So in order to get started without implicating, we could get started with our reserved fund, because we're going to have to tap into that anyway. Trying to give time for the disbursement of the grant to continue. If we don't get the grant, then we know that we need to move forward with the bonds.
Right. Yes, so, we would use our money in the checking account, actually, to start the process. But we'd have this as a fall gap. So yes. So in other words, between the $4.4 million and what we have in our checking account or in the Harbor's fund, there's the initial $1.1 million sitting there that we could start the project with that and then use this if we have to. Does that make sense?
There's also money in CBP funds, and the Harbor Reserve Fund has close to $1 million in it. So there is probably, not that you want to take it all, but there's probably there's almost $2.5 million available for short term, probably, but to leverage if you needed to.
Right. So I'm just trying to give this an option of do we want to continue with it as the Port and Harbor Commission is asked us for, or but this is the way we can do it.
I have a question on the 20 versus 25, and you probably don't have the answer today, but before we decide on 21st 25, you're suggesting that we're going to put away $40,000 payments less annually, and then we'll pay that $400,000 back in 10 years. But what is the balance in 10 years on a 20 versus a 25? You're going to lose at least part of that, if not all of it.
That's correct. You follow my? Yes, I do follow you, but I was looking at it just from safety. Our checkbook.
Okay.
I don't think we're going to lose. We're not going to gain anything, but we're not. If we fell into a shortfall where we needed that $40,000 to run then we'd have it.
Have you added up what the annual payments would be? With the $2 million bond we already have, plus the other one. The reason I say that is just so council's aware, in numbers I have done, the harbor last year netted $260,000, and it's on the way to do more. And I did some numbers, and in a pinch, if things went correctly, the harbor could net $400,000, which is about what the bonds are. And then, we're going to put CBP funds on top of it. But bottom line, if you lost CBP funds and the payments weren't over $400,000, I think the harbor could handle it if they had to. That's kind of, and that's stretching it, but that's with like a 5% increase and a couple other changes that will probably happen within a year or so. So there is, it's not like if the bonds wouldn't be funded, it just would, you'd have to go out the 25 years if we lose CBP funds, from what I've seen. And then the next question I have is, do we want to address the two options tonight, so you can move forward or not move forward with those, so in any future dealing with Bellingham Marine, you don't have to play with that later?
Yeah, I'd like to address that. I mean, after discussing it with you today and looking it over, I think that as the Port and Harbor has already voted on, that the option of moving the $68,000, moving the walkway back to where it was, is a good plan, especially with what we were discussing about the H-float, maybe taking a few fingers out and being able to put excess bow pickers and stuff in that area, which would be totally out of the way, and they love to go over there anyway, so that would give us a better option.
Yeah, in that, if anybody's not clear, Ports and Harbors recommended option 1, which is moving the walkway back and not doing the extra electric. When Kyle and I sat down with Bellingham Marine, we thought we were going to take the electric from H-float and move it to whiskey float, and there was basically, you wouldn't even see the difference in costs. But apparently they took it out of H-float, but then they did it as it's because it wasn't the original design, they added it on, but it's a lot to add to it. And in what Kyle's talking about is on H-float is the east side of H-float is all transient, and it's not utilized all the time heavily. It's like weekends and stuff. But if we were to take, I don't know, 6, I'll just come up with a number, 6 of the fingers off, it would allow you to transient longer boats instead of 26 footers. So basically it's replacing what's lost in the turning basin. But the big thing is, instead of having 24 transient slips for 24 footers, you'd have, you can divide it however you want, but you'd have like 12 for 26 footers, and then you could probably raft 12 more that wouldn't have to be limited to the length. So you're giving the ability for the harbor master to find a place for bigger boats, for more transient space for bigger boats. And if we eliminate 6 fingers, we're probably going to save 30 grand on the fingers. So that 66,000 is now down to 36,000. Plus, if you look at the 66,000, that's 2 additional fingers for the extra slips too. So the actual cost of moving it was 55,000. The 10,000 was actually because we're adding 2 fingers that we wouldn't have otherwise had, if that all makes sense. So putting all that together, you're looking at about $30,000 to actually move the headwalk back, and if we did it that way. So it's just a thought of how to manipulate it based on the big thing is taking the fingers off H-float allows you to put bow pickers there. They're too long otherwise. So it kind of just is it's a compromise on the whole scenario. But it also could give you room to put, if a boat could get in there, put in a 50-footer during the winter or 60-footer during the winter. So it opens up more flexibility. Good, perfect word. I'll shut up now.
Yes, sir. Well, it gives us all, we're learning, what we're seeing this year is we're also getting a lot of seiners back in here. And right now, I mean, this last weekend, it was a zoo down there. We had a rodeo, and we had, the seiners were stacked up in there on A-float, and we almost to the point of shutting the harbor down. So it was that packed this last week. So with opening those H-float fingers back up, that gives us the flexibility too of running some of those larger boats, as Dave was talking about, and not only larger, for the fishing vessels, commercial fishing vessels, but some of the commercial fishing, the big boats that are coming in now that need place as well. They didn't have any choice this weekend.
And that's a recent...
that's the trend, though.
Yeah. well, according to Whittier Seafoods, we're probably going to look at 6 more seiners in here than we've had in the past. So by taking the slips off of H float, then you don't have to raft the bow pickers on A float. You can put more seiners out there, but it's still interesting. If you go up to the harbor, look at the picture back from whenever it was, the harbor was full and A float was rafted 3 or 4 deep, all with recreational boats. There were like 2 commercial boats in the whole harbor at the time. So it just shows the changes that have happened in the last 20 years.
I'd like to speak on one other thing while I've got the microphone, is on the grant. One of the things we're looking at, this $25 million grant, is to take the first phase of it, finish the harbor, then concentrate the second phase being the city dock, and also including in that the lift. And then onto the ocean dock with the phase 3, and phase 4 would be doing the engineering study on the DeLong dock. So at the phase 4, when that comes in, if we have whatever the report is on the DeLong dock, if we need funding for that, then we can go back in and ask for another grant to repair or replace or whatever we have to do on the DeLong dock.
And phase 2 is the erosion also too, right?
Yes, I'm sorry, but in both phase 2 and phase 3, where we're looking at the city dock that takes care of all that erosion through there, puts a walkway across through there. The same thing on phase 3, which is the ocean dock, putting back that walkway behind fees and that area all the way out to the triangle. So we're trying to encompass a lot into one little project. One little, but it's a large one.
Greg?
Well, one other thing on H float, there is electrical there, but it will only be for the lighting at the end of the fingers. So, you know, that there will be electricity there, but only for the lighting of the end of the pole on the end. No pedestals.
And that's based on the lack of use. But on the other hand, we had to remove a lot of pedestals when we did phase 2, so we have them stacked up. So the potential is there to be able to go back later with that. And if there's room on the transformer to add someplace without, if we really needed it, it's not that difficult to go back on it probably. As I throw out one more time, I walked down G float last week and counted, I forgot the number of boats. There were probably 19, but there were 5 boats that were hooked up to electric, and that's the basis of H float, is these little boats, most of them don't have shore power hookup. Over time, more and more would get them, but that's the basis of this, is it just isn't being utilized, and it's, you know, it's a lot of money, extra money for, and you know, the weather gets them regardless of whether they're used, so it just, there isn't a demand for it. It's not really just a cost saver, it's just there's no demand for it.
Thank you, Kyle. Okay. We're into council discussion.
Well, the first thing I'd say, what do we want to give direction to Kyle so he knows for the three recommendations, move forward, which, you know, option 1, option 2, we discussed it, but we didn't. I saw head nods, but nothing official.
Okay.
All Perhaps at the special meeting, we can really simplify and outline the options that are available for you to consider. Instead of having to make a decision tonight, if we're going to meet on the 26th, we can quickly bullet the information for easy consumption for the community and for council. If it can wait a week.
I don't know why it couldn't, but either way, I mean, I support the Ports and Harbors recommendations, all three of them actually, so it's that simple for me.
And I do too.
I support all three.
Just given the consensus, I think it would be appropriate to do a motion. Just do a motion so that, so that you have a clear.
I'd ask for a motion regarding the harbor.
Okay. Yeah, I move that the city move forward with the harbor project with bonding, as stated here, the $4.4 million, and in the options, option 1, which is moving the headwalk south to connect it straight forward, and then not going forward with the electric on Whiskey Float.
I second that.
Okay, it was my understanding that we were going to pursue the grant, and if the grant does not come through, we had the bonding as a fallback.
But but you still have to, I'm sure for Bellingham Marine to move forward, we're going to have to something's going to have to happen to guarantee. So my understanding is we can cancel the bonds if we get the grant, but we still need to move forward partially with the bonds. We don't have to take the bonds. We would get them approved, but not take them. And then, so we would cancel them before we got them, but we'd still, I believe we'd still be in the process of moving forward with them, so.
But starting with the general fund, starting with the general funds to get us to that point first.
I don't think it would be general fund. I think we would be looking at harbor revenue, the harbor checkbook, the harbor reserve fund, and the CBP funds would be where this funding would come from. Right. I don't know in percentages. I don't know. There will have to be probably a resolution specifically how to take that, but at least Kyle can get it started. So probably at the next meeting there will be something more specific than, yeah, we're going to take it from here and here and here.
Any more questions?
Calling for a vote. Dave Pinkish?
Yes.
Dave Dickinson?
Yes.
Monty Irvin? Yes. And Dan Blair?
Yes.
Motion passed.
Okay, council discussion.
I would just say that making this motion, after I think about it, it's probably very important for Bellingham Marine. So they know it's not just a consensus that it was, so thank you, Holly, for having us do that. I think that will be extremely valuable to them.
I would like to bring something up also for your consideration, and that is that yesterday at the work session, we talked about Article 13 of our code, which is the grievance procedure, adopting what had previously, instead of adopting the 2.70 personnel administration in its entirety, we talked about just adopting the grievance procedure to, that way if someone files a grievance, instead of it coming before council, it would go to a hearing officer. May I have permission, if we're meeting on the on June 26th, to introduce that so that we can move forward with adopting it? I mean, I would bring it forth. You could review it, comment, questions. May I do that?
Absolutely.
So for council discussion, there's the, did you see Scott's request for a generator for this building. We don't have a backup generator for this building. We have an automatic transfer switch that could be connected to a generator, but if the power goes out in the middle of the winter, right now, there is no backup source of power right now.
When the power goes out.
There's no power. No, his plan right now would be to put a generator indoors, inside, out of the weather, have ventilation cut in so that they could run it indoors, and it would be vented outside. But he's gone out and got some quotes from CAT and from Cummins and maybe some others, and has got that here in the packet. So it was something I noticed was not in the, I thought it might be on the agenda, but I thought I'd just bring it up that it should be discussed.
It probably isn't going to come from the same funds, but I guess I would ask if we're going to do that, instead of piecing it together, should we not also look at funding for this building? Put it together, kind of?
So Johnny and I are actually working together because when the budget was passed last year, there were no funds for the new building at all. Therefore, and there's that issue, and there's, I think, 2 or 3 others that are going to require an appropriations from the general fund. So we're putting together a report for your consideration. We were going to do that in July. I don't know if we can wait until July to have that full discussion and just take care of everything in one fell swoop, or which is where we were heading towards. That's why we didn't bring it up. Or we can go ahead and discuss the generator, although, well, Scott will be here by the 26th if we can, and he can better explain his thought process and the process in general. I defer to the will of the council.
I would just rather get hit with all of the money at once is what I'm thinking, instead of every week coming for another check.
I agree with that. Another item for discussion is the sale of the P12 building. Is that something that you guys want to talk about? From what I understand, we're mostly moved out of there. Scott says that there's still stuff there, but he could be out in 15 days or something like that. We need to sell that thing, I think.
Or don't we have some leases going on in that? And when do the leases end?
Right now, Whittier Seafood is leasing 2 different sections of P12, and we have short 6-month leases. I believe they're, well, don't quote me, but I think they're over in sometime in October, I think.
Not that necessarily matters, but we have already approved putting it out for RFP when Mark Lynch was the city manager. I will say this, though, that, and I don't, at the time, I think the consensus was, let's just get rid of it, put it on the tax base, let somebody else deal with it. And I still feel that way to a point. But I also wonder if, and I don't know if it's feasible, if that somehow it be sold in 2 pieces. It's just with what's going on, and I don't want to go into detail, but I just think it might be not get all eggs in one basket with selling it in one piece. It's just a thought. I don't know the answer to it, the difficulty. I just want to throw it out.
Should we get like a commercial real estate agent out there and get it on the market for us to see what they could, give them some direction?
I don't think with an RFP, I don't think you can do it that way. You would put it out. It would be, we would have to market it. But maybe, can a real estate agent market an RFP?
We've actually had a few communities that have felt that the RFP process wasn't working very well with some particular sales. Then, unfortunately, you're exactly right, you have to amend the code to make it happen, and it's sort of a new to government approach, but they're finding it successful. So maybe maybe if this is something you're gonna take up and you have the RFP approval, maybe what I can do is make sure you have the information you need to take a different approach if that makes the most sense for the city.
It just seems like that, you know, commercial real estate would certainly get it into more people's eyes than might not be needed, but, you know, the state sold the Bartlett on eBay, so.
And we don't really have the resources ourselves to do it. Everyone's pretty busy here, I think, to, you know, go through the RFP process and make sure that it got into the right hands and the different types of entities that we really want to see look at it.
So maybe commercial real estate is not the answer. Maybe it's simply to hire someone to market the RFP. I don't know. I'm just, you know, to take the time to contact every seafood processing plant and submarine building plant, and well, that's what somebody was talking about. So I'm just throwing out whatever just to try to get it out there. I don't know. It's just it would be cheaper to hire somebody than it would pay a real estate.
Yeah, they build those nice boats, you know, down in Seward and Homer. You know, boat building facility I don't think would be out of the question.
Right, and it also, we wouldn't have to change the code to just to hire a city marketer. I don't know what you call it, but somebody. I'd have no idea who. I usually have an answer for that. Nobody pops into my head, but actually, well, I do, but I'm not going to mention it.
Yeah, I definitely want to see the thing sold. I thought Peter was going to try and find some East Coast advertisement.
Wall Street Journal.
Was that for this or for the city manager?
It was for the building.
For the building.
To see the building.
Although what you talk about, I would like to, I guess, if other council members agree, just see if it's feasible to divide it. And I don't know that it is, but you got the heating system. Scott might be able to answer that in a second, that no way because of this or that.
But I mean, if we're trying to get, you know, in an RFP process, we're looking, the desire is the highest price. Would we be getting the higher price with a divided half a cow type thing?
Theoretically, you get more. Yeah, but I don't know. It's probably not worth it, but I just have concerns about putting all our eggs in one basket.
Well, I think we get the money. I mean, they get the basket.
Yeah.
Any further discussion? So there, I mean, this might have been more appropriate to have it in, never mind, I'll just wait on that.
Mayor? Oh.
I'm sorry, did you hire somebody since we had the workshop?
It was just an acting or an interim position.
Oh.
Diana will be filling that role until we get firmer direction. So that's all that was done.
The existing employee.
I was just going to ask if this would be an okay time to leave, since we have citizens' comments left and a tunnel opening. But, okay.
Absolutely.
Yes? Okay. Have a good night.
We can only get in so much trouble in this. Citizens' discussion? Greg?
just come to you as a volunteer firefighter EMS. I think we appreciate what Greg's doing and how he's trying to kind of direct the department. You probably just missed them, but we had tonight, I missed training. We had Girdwood Fire in the community, probably, well, there was 4 rigs, so probably 2 person per rig. They were interested in the differences and the uniqueness of fighting fires and working medical in Whittier. So I think Chris Lau showed them the cruise ship terminal and the harbor, and then they wanted to get a tour of our new fire station. So there's been a lot of interdepartmental work in the last couple of weeks, and it's something I think it's good, and I'm glad that's the way it's going, because at times we need Girdwood, and it's good to keep those open, and to see all their rigs here today was pretty sweet. So just a kudos to them.
Yes, it's good to see progress moving forward. Greg?
Underscore what Greg just said. I'm sure some of you will get an inquiry as to what Girdwood was doing over here. And we have really reached out and partnered with them. Earlier this evening, we respond mutual aid to them. They had a medical emergency on the other side of the tunnel, and Chris went over and responded to that. Tonight, they were over here anticipating that if we do get something major, that they'll be responding. And so they came over here, got oriented, went down on the dock, saw some other resources, and we are having a really good working relationship with them. We've already expanded our capabilities with the tunnel as far as communication, and we're working on mutual aid with them as well. And the relationship that we're having, the support from our volunteers, and we have a need out for our community. If there are volunteers that want to come and become a part of our EMS and our fire department, there's a big need. There's a demand. Not very many people are stepping up to that. And so under community comments, as a community member, if there are those that are looking for an opportunity to serve as a volunteer, we've got an excellent department downstairs. And there's always room for one more, present company included. We'd certainly invite that to come and be a part of that. So under citizen comments, we've got a pretty good citizen crew.
I don't mean to throw this on you in any way, because I'm sure you got enough to do, but something that happened years ago here that is completely faded out, that actually something that Whittier, basically fire, EMS, police should have some understanding of, was the state came in. We had a meeting in, I think it was in Whittier. There's a lot of people there, and the scenario was thrown out: cruise ship fire. What would be done? And it was complete. What the scenario was a cruise ship caught on fire at Naked Island, and at the time they threw. They came up with a list of all like the Klondike and all these boats that could go out and help. I mean, we're talking hundreds of people. And that completely just disappeared as far as I know, but it is just something that there's a very basic plan of how you would go about something like that, I think. And I don't know who to contact in the state about it, but one of the interesting things was they brought the same thing up for a state ferry. Like once a week, I think a 300 passenger ferry comes through here, but none of the same boats would be available in the wintertime. So, but it's something that someday I think there ought to be some organization, some like SERVs. You might be able to just tap into SERVs. I don't know. Maybe they could handle an emergency like that, but it would be good just to have some thought of what would happen in something like that. I think it was, I thought it was great that the state brought it up. And do you remember that, Don? It was I remember the previous owners of the Klondike were there, and they were talking about how many people they could take and blah, 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 but it was just, it could happen, the cruise ship fires happen, and they were just absolutely, they just, I don't know what they were going to do with it, but it's something to write down for your future chief to actually possibly come up with some basic plan for it, I think.
Chris right now is working on a risk assessment for a possible emergency response throughout the city. They have an emergency action plan that gets revisited every few years, and he's doing that right now, upgrading our plans. And so integrating a multi-agency mass disaster like that, I think that would be something that would be well worth working at and would fit very well into the overall plan on how we would respond to that kind of a disaster. How would we respond to a tsunami? How would we respond to a chemical spill within the tunnel? I see these cargo haulers skirting around here at breakneck speeds. It wouldn't take much of an accident right there to task our ability. And so, no, those kinds of, that forward thinking is good. Thank you.
Okay. Ask for a motion for adjournment. All in favor?
Aye.
Yes, whatever.
No. Yes. The agenda is complete.